Hello, good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for joining our webinar today, where we are going to be focusing on the updates to Sophos Intercept X. So we're joined here by Matt Cook from Sophos, who will be going through the webinar with you all.
Awesome. Thank you very much, Amy. Right, let me bring my screen up. Right, hey everyone. Thank you very much for joining. Yeah, as Amy said, my name's Matt. I work in the product team at Sophos, and kind of today's goal really is to give you an update on Intercept X. So you may already be using Intercept X, and if you did, this is a good. If you do, this is a good session for you because we're going to give you an update on some of the new features. And if you don't, this is an even better session for you because we're going to give you a real good rundown as to what its capabilities are. So we released Intercept X back in September, actually 2016, so almost a year and a half, I guess, and it really quickly became one of the most significant, in fact actually I think the most successful product that Sophos has ever launched. And the reason for that, we're pretty confident, is it's simple, right? It was really simple to deploy through our Sophos Central interface, and it just worked. It caught exploits that other products kind of missed. It cleaned up systems that other products couldn't clean. And it was about the closest thing that the industry really had to a cure for ransomware, right? The real problems that we had on ransomware. And so over the last year, so it's actually been a phenomenally successful product for Sophos. And actually today has probably more than 30,000 organizations using the product. And that number is growing obviously every single day. But what we're here to learn about today actually is the latest version, and actually just a day and a half ago, I think it was now, we announced Intercept X version 2 with the tagline, "Seeing the future is the future of cybersecurity." We won't have too much marketing slides in here for you today. We're going to give you a lot more detail around exactly what is in Intercept X version 2 and really how it can hopefully benefit your organization. I said there wouldn't be that many marketing slides, just forgive me with one or two, because here's one. With a great computer scientist, Alan Kay, said that the best way to predict the future is to invent it. And we kind of couldn't agree more at Sophos, right? We're taking machine learning to entirely new levels by applying deep learning neural network technologies to the world of cybersecurity. This is kind of where protection is going, right? It's the future of cybersecurity, and Sophos can be really more proud than we are to be kind of at the front of this, leading the charge. I don't have to tell you guys on the phone that the threat landscape has shifted, right? Years ago, primary forms of attack were kind of generic malware. Today, it's very, very different. 54% of organizations were hit twice on average with ransomware in 2017. These won't be astronomical statistics for you, but 83% of people agree it's become more difficult to stop these threats because quite often now they're advanced malware. It's not just a case of having one bit of malware on a machine, or even in fact one bit of ransomware, as we saw over the last year, particularly with some of the large-scale attacks, like things like NotPetya, for example. It wasn't just about ransomware. We actually saw that thing dropping cryptocurrency mining Trojans onto people's machines as well. And so more often than not, attacks often can be multi-stage. They tend to compromise or consist rather of exploits where vulnerabilities are being exploited to deliver payloads. Payloads perhaps may be executed. They may lay dormant. They may leave something else to run on a machine as well. And it's much harder now than dealing with just a simple piece of malware. It's actually dealing now with an overall quite complex attack. And that's essentially what we're looking to try and do with Intercept X, but we're taking it away from, giving you protection based on what's been seen before. We're actually moving it now towards predictive security, with the ability to foretell, with precision, that something is malware or not, that something is bad or not, to actually predict it, regardless of whether we've seen it before. And we believe that with our deep learning, as we'll go on to find out in a moment, where I'll talk some more about, we can deliver better protection, better performance, and better accuracy for organizations compared to what they're using today. And as I mentioned, we launched the next version of Intercept X. It's Intercept X version 2. It's been released and generally available for the last day and a half. It's actually been running in an early access program now for quite some months, which hopefully I'm thinking some of you might have been participating in and providing us feedback, which has been incredibly useful. And what Intercept X really is made up of is 3 pillars of protection. The first is kind of technology that's going to protect us against the unknown, protect us against the things that we've never seen before. That's where the deep learning predictive security comes in that we'll talk about. The second is around stopping ransomware, where we've been incredibly successful. We were proven incredibly successful over the last year with, again, stopping WannaCry, stopping NotPetya, those attacks. And we'll look at the technology and exactly how we're doing that with Intercept X. And then the third bucket is all around denying the attacker. And it's really making life harder for the attacker when the attacker's looking to exploit vulnerabilities. Perhaps if the attacker's looking to, it's got a foothold on the machine and is looking to elevate privileges or move laterally across the network. It's about the techniques, identifying the techniques that the attackers use so that we can frustrate them, we can detect them, and we can stop them before they're able to perform malicious actions on the machine. So let's look at those individually. And in order to kind of protect against the unknown, we need technology that's predictive rather than reactive. And by being predictive rather than reactive, we can better protect you, right? We can better protect your organization by stopping threats that would otherwise have been missed. Now, clearly machine learning is all around us, and in fact deep learning is all around us, which we're going to be talking about specifically. Yeah, we use deep learning every day. If you've got an iPhone and you talk to Siri, or if you're talking to Alexa at any point in time, perhaps you've got some facial recognition software running on your phone or on your laptop, and even self-driving cars. These all use a flavor of machine learning called deep learning. And at Sophos, we focus all of our attention on deep learning, which is really what we consider an advanced form of machine learning. It's sometimes referred to as deep learning neural networks. And it's this advanced form of machine learning that was really originally inspired around how the brain works. It can make predictions about data it's never seen before based on the data that it's been trained upon. So by training it upon what went previously, we're able to build a model that's able to predict what may be coming. Recent advances in deep learning have really allowed breakthrough results, including obviously advances in facial recognition and everything that we've kind of talked about. And now we're talking about applying that to cybersecurity. And the way Sophos applies deep learning to cybersecurity is by using it to determine if a file is good or bad. Is it benignware, in other words, good, or is it bad, even if we've never seen it before? And that means we don't use signatures at all. And instead, what we do is in the lab, and with our data science models, we extract millions of attributes about files. We run it through our deep learning model, and we can then determine if the file is good or bad based upon these attributes. We're then able to build a model that we can, or a decision matrix, if you like, that we can then deploy out to remote machines. Think of it as kind of like examining the DNA of a file to determine whether or not it's good or bad. And the model included in Intercept X is really built to analyze portable executable files. However, it not only detects malware, but it also determines if the file is a potentially unwanted application, or a PUA in Sophos speak, a PUA. And a PUA can also be known as kind of greyware. This is really files that are not technically malware, but they're probably things that you don't want running on a business endpoint. Adware, I guess, is a common example of a PUA, of a potentially unwanted application. Now, the way we create this model, the way that we've developed this machine learning model is basically our data science teams and our labs teams have kind of got together, and they've basically trained it, right? They've taken everything that we know and we've ever seen before as being good, i.e. benignware, and everything that we've ever seen before as being bad. And by feeding that into the deep learning model, the model itself can then identify the attributes. So it can then identify all the attributes of an individual file and then come up with some predictions that tell us whether or not something is good or bad. Now we can then take that model and then deploy that model into production on endpoints to allow them to dynamically decide whether something's good or bad, regardless of whether they've seen it before. Now, where deep learning differs from traditional machine learning, because lots of vendors have been talking about machine learning in cybersecurity for quite some time now, but where it differs from traditional machine learning is this dynamic selection, if you like, of attributes. Deep learning will decide which attributes itself it wants to train on and identify and use to identify good or bad files. With traditional machine learning, it has to be told the attributes. So really, the model of traditional machine learning is kind of only as good as the people that are feeding it. It's only actually as good as the people that are identifying the attributes and saying this is a bad thing in the first place. Now, that eventually leads to scale problems, and it leads to capacity problems, where particularly where you're getting lots and lots of new files, being able to actually then retrain a model becomes a particular challenge, whereas deep learning overcomes that by making those decisions for itself. So Sophos's deep learning malware detection features, well, we've kind of talked about some of these already, right? It's going to prevent both the known and the never seen before malware, and it's going to block the malware before it executes. It really doesn't rely on any signatures. So if you think about your traditional antivirus and your traditional endpoint protection software, they typically need signature updates on a fairly regular basis, sometimes daily, sometimes even more frequent than that. Now, with deep learning, the model is updated approximately every 6 weeks. However, there's no real set rule about the time period for an update. If the data science team determines that the threat landscape has changed significantly, it's possible that we might update the model sooner. And it's also possible that new iterations of the model actually wouldn't show up a large enough improvement to warrant an update at all. So there's no magic length of time between updates, which means you're not continuously having to update your endpoints on a frequent basis, right? The updates themselves are actually very infrequent. They should probably be measured in weeks or even months, not days, and certainly not hours. And if a model updates too frequently in a machine learning product, that's a sign that actually it's not very mature. Because instead of being truly predictive, models that update too frequently are actually reactive. They're actually having to be retrained on a regular basis, so they're not giving you that predictive level of security. And one way to measure this is to determine the drop-off in efficacy, if you like, between updates, see how well the model kind of ages over time. And the Sophos deep learning malware detection model has been proven to go almost 2 months without an update at all, with little or no drop-off in efficacy. And that means that the model was still able to proactively predict if a file was malicious or not without even having seen it before. And it does that regardless of whether the host is online or whether it's offline. So it doesn't require a cloud connection. It's not sending files off to a cloud to be scanned. The model's actually operating locally on the machine, and it's doing it with an incredibly small footprint, in fact, of under 20 megabytes running on the machine, detecting malware in approximately 20 milliseconds. And one of the huge benefits here is that it works out of the box. There's no additional training needed. And again, what you tend to find with a lot of traditional machine learning products is when you deploy them in your organization, you've actually got to spend a lot of time training them. You've got to put them into this training mode that allows it to kind of learn about the bespoke applications that you're using, so it doesn't have too many false positives. Now, the benefits of deep learning is we've done a lot of that training for you. And in fact, the model is actually training itself up there in the lab. And so it works out of the box. There are no training modes required, and you don't have the same, quite the same risks of the levels of false positives that you would get with traditional machine learning. And that effectively means that our deep learning model is, our deep learning neural networks, they're smarter, they're faster, and they're smaller. We get higher detection rates, and we get more, essentially much quicker, much faster operating model and a much smaller footprint running out on the machine itself. Okay, so that's the deep learning model that sits within Intercept X, detecting the malware when it gets down onto the machine. How do we stop ransomware? Now, this has actually been one of the core components of Intercept X since we first launched it back in 2016. We live in the shadow of ransomware. We had a huge year for ransomware, and I'm sure some people on this call today probably got hurt by that. 54% of organizations were hit by ransomware in the last year. 85% have either been hit or they expect to be hit at some point, because who doesn't, right? We can't necessarily predict when the next wave is coming, or in fact, even how it's going to be delivered. You can see the stats of the average ransomware payout, and 77% of ransomware victims were running up-to-date endpoint protection, which kind of shows you that traditional-based antivirus and endpoint protection is actually not proving to be particularly effective against some of the new ransomware. And as is the case with some of these huge organizations that really got hit hard by NotPetya last year, with the cost of recovery and the cost to the business impact being extortionate. It's kind of, the bigger they are, the harder they fall in the case of these organizations. Now, luckily for those people running Intercept X, if you were running Intercept X, we had two key components of anti-ransomware technology in there that protected you incredibly effectively against both WannaCry and NotPetya that outbroke last year. And in fact, pretty much all of the ransomware that was seen out there last year. So CryptoGuard, first of all, CryptoGuard was incredibly effective against WannaCry. And CryptoGuard runs on the machine, is designed to protect the individual files. And what it does is it takes a just-in-time file copy of any writes back to the hard disk. And so it's looking to identify the behaviors of malicious file encryption that we often see by ransomware. And if we identify that malicious file encryption, we can isolate the process. And because we've got this just-in-time cache of the last few files, we can then roll back those individual files. Now, that was effective against WannaCry because that tends to be how it operated. It was looking to encrypt individual files on the machine. Now, NotPetya was slightly different. So NotPetya was actually more of a destructive ransomware. It was looking to hold your whole machine hostage by messing around in the system area of the disk, so that when you booted the machine, it appeared that it had been taken for ransom and you had to pay the ransom in order to try and get back onto your machine. It was actually quite destructive. Now, what WipeGuard technology does is it sits there looking at those system areas of the disk, essentially the master boot record and areas of the disk, to prevent malicious tampering with them. And again, it stops those malicious processes. It was incredibly effective, as I mentioned, against NotPetya. And the combination of these two behavioral-based technologies, CryptoGuard and WipeGuard, make up the anti-ransomware technology within Intercept X. As we've said already, it's been proven highly effective out in the market, unfortunately, because of the activities that we've seen over the last year. That's just the case. But luckily, if you were running Intercept X, I'm sure hopefully you had some wonderful experiences there with that. Detects file, disk, and boot-based ransomware, and because it's behavior-based, it doesn't need to see the ransomware in order to protect against it. So effectively, it's future-proofing against new variants coming through. The automatic recovery capability that we've got in there allows us to roll back any files that have been infected automatically. And we have some attack chain analysis, which actually gives you a nice visualization of a ransomware attack so that you can see, how did it get in? Was it a Word document or did it come in through an Outlook email? Someone launched Word and the Word document perhaps was then exploited a vulnerability, and you can get a nice visualization of that. We call that root cause analysis. And if you haven't seen that, that's a feature of the management platform, Sophos Central, and I'll show you that very shortly. Okay, the third bucket of technology in Intercept X that we talked about was really focused around denying the attacker. How can we make the attacker's life harder? And we have an anti-exploit technology built into Intercept X, and this is really designed to stop those fileless attacks and stop the vulnerabilities, the software vulnerabilities being exploited. And the intention here is to actually stop them in the early stage of attack before the malicious payload is actually delivered. Quite often you'll see an attacker exploiting a vulnerability. Let's say, again, maybe it was a Word document. You received a Word document on email. You open the Word document. It tries to exploit a vulnerability in Word that hasn't been patched. Perhaps executes PowerShell, goes off and runs something. Now, the anti-exploit technology is designed to detect the exploit of the vulnerability so that we can stop it at that point. So actually, the malicious payload actually doesn't get as far as executing. So in theory, if it's an exploit-based attack, we wouldn't necessarily need the fail-safes of the anti-ransomware technology and the deep learning file detection as well. So many of these exploit-based attacks tend to use a handful of techniques, a handful of individual techniques. In fact, there are thousands and thousands of software vulnerabilities reported every single year. And clearly, we all do our best to patch our systems and update Office, update Windows, and patch all the other applications that we have. But the attackers still look to try and utilize a lot of those vulnerabilities. And they will, when they're utilizing the vulnerabilities, they will use a handful of different techniques. And some of those you can see as an example here on the screen, like a heap spray or a stack pivot or a rock-based attack. And in fact, many attacks tend to use a couple of different techniques. And what it allows the attacker to do is essentially sail all the way through memory and not have to actually deliver a payload down onto the hard disk. And Intercept X is really focused on stopping these individual techniques and identifying these individual techniques. The examples in the previous slide really are only a sample of what an active adversary uses. And there are multiple exploit techniques that can be used at each stage of any given attack. And these are some of those types of techniques that Sophos Intercept X will identify. I think we're up to about 27 or so different anti-exploit techniques that we're protecting against, including those that were leveraged in both the WannaCry and NotPetya based attacks, things like APC protection, for example, which was utilized in NotPetya, as well as code cave mitigation, which stops malicious code that's hidden inside legitimate software as well. And if you're interested in fact, the detail on any more of these techniques, we have a really good paper called Exploits Explained that will give you a full breakdown of all of these individual techniques and how we're defending against them. And in fact, there are other active adversary protections that we've got in here designed to identify the attacker that's there's actually got a foothold on the machine, and then wants to start moving laterally. For example, perhaps they're looking to steal credentials from the machine to allow them to move laterally across the network with a privileged access. And again, there are protections built in to detect that, to avoid the credential theft taking place. Now, obviously, with any good product release, we wanted to make sure that people got their hands on the new product in order to test it. So we gave the product to Enterprise Strategy Group, an analyst firm, in order to play around with it before we actually released it to the market. And during their testing, they found that Intercept X stopped 100% of the exploit techniques that were missed by traditional antivirus applications. And this is kind of really important that antivirus applications really are just looking for some malware on your machine. They're not looking for how the malware is getting on there in the first place. So stopping the exploit allows us to stop the attack in the earliest stage possible. And the report that ESG put together gives you a good overview of that. In fact, a good review of the product, and is available for download on the website, which we'll link you to shortly. And there's more, of course there's more. And there's lots more in Intercept X. So we've talked already about anti-exploit, about machine learning, about anti-ransomware technology, but also built into the product, we have both malware removal and root cause analysis capabilities. And the root cause analysis tool that I did touch on this briefly earlier, this gives you a really nice visualization of exactly what goes on in the attack. So, for example, if we see ransomware on a machine, we detect ransomware on a machine, where did it start? Was it an Outlook email? Did the Outlook then launch Word? Did Word then open a document? Did that document start accessing files on the hard disk? Did it then launch PowerShell, which kicked off a script download? Or, it gives you that level of visibility into the attack. And yes, you've got a nice sort of simple diagrams here that you can click on and find out what went on, but equally you've also got behind the scenes a full breakdown of the actual incident itself. The data recorder that runs inside Intercept X tracks the processes, it tracks the activity on the machine, so that if we have a detection, that information can then be visualized and examined through the root cause analysis tool up on Sophos Central, which is our cloud-based management platform. And of course, if we know everything that the malware did on the machine, like did it touch a registry key, did it touch other files, for example, we can then, of course, clean it up. Because, think again about your traditional antivirus and endpoint protection products. They're kind of focused on detecting the malware and then sticking it in quarantine and getting rid of it. Well, if we know everything that it did, we can go and undo all that stuff, right? So we can not only get rid of the malware itself, but we can get rid of those registry keys that it left behind in order for the code to be executed on when the machine's rebooted, or is the other code or the other files that have been left behind. So the Sophos Clean technology that's built into Intercept X will kick off on any detections, can be invoked as well, in order to go through and examine a system and find out what's unusual as well. So as well as being tied to the individual triggers of perhaps a piece of malware or ransomware or something happening on the machine, it can also be run independently as well in order to analyze the system and give it a deep system clean. And also with Intercept X, for those of you that are using Sophos firewalls, particularly our XG firewall, then you've got the ability to use synchronized security. By registering your firewall in Sophos Central, essentially what that allows to happen is your endpoints can all of a sudden now start talking to your firewall. So if your firewall sees one of your endpoints talking to a command and control server, for example, it can tell the endpoint and then isolate it, or it can automatically isolate the endpoint and stop it talking out on the internet. Where if the health status changes on an endpoint because it may have ransomware or some malware has been detected, or an attacker has attempted to elevate their privileges on a machine or attempt to access the credential database, then at that point the firewall can be told and then can isolate the machine so data can't be exfiltrated. Or perhaps then the firewall can stop the attacker moving laterally across segments of the network. And that's essentially the power of synchronized security. Now, with Intercept X and with our latest XG firewall version 17, we also take that a step further. It was one of the challenges that firewall administrators often have is visibility of the network traffic, right? Quite often, some applications they can pick out and write rules for because they've got predictive ports or predictive traffic patterns, and so they know it's a particular application. But more often than not, the majority of traffic flows through a firewall in this bucket called others, or unidentified or unknown. Where the firewall doesn't know what the application is, and so the firewall can't actually determine how to treat the traffic itself. So with synchronized security and synchronized app control, which is activated in Intercept X version 2, if you've got XG Firewall, it will share the information around the applications that are generating that network traffic. It will share that information with the firewall. So the firewall will get to see the name of the application that generated the traffic, and in fact, even the path to the application. What that allows you to do as an administrator is, of course, then to classify and control those applications as you wish to do so. And in fact, with dynamic classification, you can then, of course, have policies pre-set up in order to treat the traffic appropriately as those applications are then first seen within the network. So that's essentially synchronized security. That's the feature we call synchronized app control. And we are, again, had a third-party analyst firm, in this case IDC, take a look at synchronized security, come back with a nice statement of no other company is close to delivering this type of communication between endpoint and network security products. And really what it's designed to do is really just to make your life easier. The default action if a machine gets ransomware at the moment could be, oh, quick, go to the firewall, lock it down so it can't talk out. Well, we can automate that. We're effectively automating the parts of the incident response process for you to make your response to any particular incidents much quicker. Now, of course, we think this is the world's best endpoint protection, because why wouldn't we? Right? It's designed to stop these unknown threats with our deep learning technology that we've talked about. It prevents ransomware with CryptoGuard and WipeGuard. It has the ability to roll back the files to their individual state, and it can deny the attacker with exploit prevention technology that we have built in onto the machine, which is, much of that is incredibly unique technology. But you don't necessarily have to take our word for it. When you're choosing your kind of endpoint security software, it's very hard to choose between individual vendors. It's very hard to compare, in fact, between individual vendors, because quite often they don't necessarily all have the same types of technology and the same levels of protection built into it. So what we've produced is a test plan, effectively a cookbook to testing endpoint security. That will give you an idea of, what should you be looking out for, what should you be flexing the muscles of on these individual vendors, and it will actually tell you how to effectively set up your own lab environment to do that. Now, that can involve quite a bit of work. So to shortcut the process, if you don't want to take on that work and do the testing yourself to compare those tools, of course, we will describe in quite a lot of detail in the document exactly how Sophos protects against the individual threats. So it will give you a good breakdown of that. And just in a few minutes in the chat box, we'll post the links to this so that you can pull down the cookbook as well. And of course, you can pull down the cookbook. In fact, you can pull down the software directly from Sophos website as well, because actually up on sophos.com, you'll find links to a trial. There's free 30-day trials available for Intercept X, so that you can download and install the software. And uniquely, with Intercept X, we've built this in such a way that you don't necessarily have to remove any endpoint security product that you have currently. So if you're using antivirus from another vendor, it's kind of unfortunate if you are, but hey, it's okay because you can put Intercept X on top of that. So whilst that antivirus product may just be looking for malware or maybe giving you some web security or web control features that you want to keep, that's absolutely fine, because Intercept X can run alongside that, and it can give you that deep learning technology to see the unknown malware and detect that. It can give you the anti-ransomware technology to stop your machines being hit hard by ransomware, and it equally will give you the anti-exploit technology. And also, of course, back on the management platform, you get that full visibility of everything that's gone on. So Intercept X is designed to run on Windows workstations, but it can run alongside any other vendor's kind of antivirus product. But equally, if you're already using Sophos' own endpoint protection, it will complement that by actually running as part of the same agent. So you won't need to deploy anything new. If you already have that endpoint protection agent deployed, it's just a component within the agent so it's not utilizing additional or significantly additional resources on your machine, and doesn't give you a huge management overhead to deploy either. Okay, so that is Intercept X. If you have any questions, now is a fantastic time to be popping those in the Q&A panel, and I'm sure Amy's going to read out those in a second for us. Just before we do, I should also mention that Intercept X is available for Windows workstations. It's an endpoint solution, right? So it's designed for Windows workstations. We also have a Mac version, which is currently in early access program, which you can play around with even during a trial if you want to, and that's going to give you the anti-ransomware CryptoGuard technology and the root cause analysis technology on Mac platforms as well, and that will be released pretty soon, but it's in early access preview, so you can play around with that right now. If you're looking to protect your servers, we have our Server Protection Advanced product, which also has CryptoGuard anti-ransomware technology built into that as well. Servers obviously have a particular profile. They need to be able to lock. You need to be able to lock them down so only certain applications can run. So making sure you have a look at our Server Protection Advanced product for those servers. Oh, I'm going to pause for breath. Right, Amy, I think I've pretty much covered as much as I need to for the minute. Have we got any questions come through?
Perfect. Yes. Okay, so we do have some questions. I'm just going to pop it back to my screen. So as you can see, so if you do have any questions, there is just a questions box panel. So if you just type them in there, I'll read those out for Matt. So we've got a couple already. The first one's from another Matt, Matthew. Is this all available on premise?
Good question. Yes, I haven't mentioned that. Right, so if you're using Sophos' Endpoint Protection Advanced, which is managed by Enterprise Console, so for those of you that don't know, Enterprise Console is effectively a server that you would install in order to create the policies in order to manage your individual endpoints, and so you would run that within your environment. If you're using that, then you need to migrate your endpoints so that they are managed by Sophos Central, which is the cloud-based management platform, in order to use Intercept X. However, if you are using that, there is also you can stay using that. That's not a problem at all. There is an add-on to Endpoint Protection Advanced called Endpoint Exploit Prevention, which will give you some of the anti-exploit and anti-ransomware capabilities. Some of the things it won't give you, though, and you will only find these available through the cloud-managed or central-managed endpoint, and that is the deep learning capabilities and the root cause analysis. So those are the kind of two big differences between the two capabilities. So really now is a great time if you're already using Sophos Endpoint, but it's managed by Enterprise Console. Now is a great time to actually look at, is it right for me now to migrate to central management if possible.
Thanks, Matt. So we've got another question here. This one's from Mick. He said, we're looking at moving to Sophos AV for our endpoints this year. Would we still need this if we opted for Intercept X?
Cool. Yeah, again, another great question. So this is the answer to this one really is entirely up to you. So now we strongly recommend layers of security. I talked about the 3 buckets of technology within Intercept X. So for the deep learning, for the file detection, the anti-ransomware, the anti-exploit, those are kind of the 3 buckets. But there are additional buckets that endpoint protection software will give you as well. For example, within Sophos' Endpoint Protection Advanced, you've got web security technology built into that, so that when your users are going to a web page, for example, if there's a JavaScript running that kicks off a crypto miner, or they're accessing a malicious URL, you're going to get those protections coming from the traditional endpoint protection software, so the Sophos Endpoint Protection software. So really, for the full stack of protection, I mean, obviously there's others in there as well. Actually, I should mention things like web control or filtering based on website classification. There's also device control, stopping people plugging in USB keys, stuff like that. Application control, making sure they don't install things that are restricted by the organization. I would essentially look at those individual features and say, do I need those features? Yes, no. If I do need those features, and quite often the web security is probably the biggest one that would say, yes, actually I do want those as well. Then we strongly recommend combining both Endpoint Advanced and Intercept X, and because it runs all as the one agent anyway, from a deployment perspective, it's pretty much a no-brainer. So the answer is it's kind of entirely up to you, but I would look at those individual features, and we strongly would recommend the two running together. Actually, on that note, I've pasted it into the chat box. I don't know if anyone can kind of paste that back out into so everyone else can see it as well. A couple of links. On one of those links, it will show you a table of all of those individual features, so you can see those features of the endpoint protection advanced product, and you can also see them are in Intercept X. And in fact, from memory, if you just Google Sophos endpoint license guide, that will take you to exactly to the page that you're after.
Okay.
Sorry, that was a long answer.
That's fine. So there's another question here. Does Intercept X work alongside AV?
Yeah, absolutely. So again, it's kind of the same answer, but it's for different antiviruses. So you might be using I don't know, Windows Defender or McAfee or whatever else it happens to be. Yes, you can put Intercept X onto that machine, and you get all the benefits of using the products alongside.
Brilliant, thank you, Matt. So I'm not sure there are any more questions. We should give it another minute or so, see if any come through. And if you would prefer to submit any questions outside of the webinar, there's our email there, and I will pass that on to our specialists here at Bytes.
Perfect. And then I should also mention if you're already using Intercept X and you want to use these new features, obviously these new features will be rolling out to you now. We won't be turning on a couple of them by default, so things like the machine learning, for example, because you already got the product deployed, you can go in and actually enable those yourself so that you can choose when you activate them on your end users. There's, again, one of the links that I posted in the chat, which I don't know if it's going to get echoed to everyone or not, but we can share it with you afterwards, is just a link to a knowledge base article that tells you exactly how to enable the new features as well.
Yes, I'll add that to, sorry to interrupt, I'll add that to the follow-up email, Matt, for everyone, so they've got that.
Brilliant, thank you.
Okay, so I think that's all the questions that we've got for today. So thank you everyone for joining the webinar, taking the time out of your days to join us, and thank you, Matt, for presenting as well. So as mentioned at the beginning of the webinar, I'll send you all a link to the recording and probably tomorrow morning for you to watch as well. Okay, so thanks everyone, and enjoy the rest of your afternoon. Thank you.